In the doldrums of summer, it's easy to get bored. It's easy to lose sight. Not me. We got a whole lot of Oilers questions to get into.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Friday edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. I want to thank everybody who makes Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. So, we're kind of in the dead of summer, and you know the expression is usually the dead of winter, but in the hockey world, the dead of winter is a good thing. That means the Oilers are playing the Senators at 7:15 puck drop in Ottawa. But in the dead of summer, when all of the hockey media is in their cabins or carrying water for less than reputable characters from the Chicago Blackhawks organization, someone has got to carry the load. Someone has got to do the work. And today's episode is really straightforward. I cooked up 10 questions that I think people have about the Oilers, and we'll carry on through. They're broken up into three categories. First, the idea of what's different and where is there room for improvement. The second segment is going to be about what's going on around them as far as their division, some guys they might be able to acquire at the trade deadline. And then the final segment is going to be real straightforward. What's the big picture outlook? So the first question I have written down here on my notes: can Stuart Skinner go from the 12th or 13th best goalie in the league to a top 10 goalie in the league? And that might not sound like a big leap, and that's why I do think it's certainly feasible for Stuart Skinner to take a marginal step forward. I think if he's able to come out of the gate a little bit better coming into next season as the starter, not like this past season where Jack Campbell was the starter out of the gate and the team was really just in a really awful rut. And I don't think it was particularly reflective of either Jay Woodcroft or Stuart Skinner, how the Oilers played in October and early November. So I think if Stuart Skinner is capable of taking a marginal step forward, I'm not saying Vezina candidate, I'm saying a little more consistency, get that save percentage close to 910, have that goal saved above expected somewhere in the mid to high teens. That alone should get you 45. Alone should get you to 40 some odd wins. And then that doesn't include overtime wins, and maybe he steals a game here or there. But at the outset, I think that's my single biggest question as far as where's there room for improvement. My next question: do Jeff Skinner and Victor Arvidsson fill needs? And this is a fair question. This is something I had a conversation with one of my friends the other day about. Of Skinner and Arvidsson, respectively, are better than Ryan McLeod, and they are better than Warren Foegele in terms of their skill sets. They can do more things. They can score more goals. They can assist on more chances. Both of them are really quality transition players, good at skating the puck into the offensive zone with possession to establish the offensive zone, to control play. But I do think it's a fair caveat to say the Oilers already have some good puck carriers. You know, they've got McDavid, they've got Draisaitl, got Nuge. When he's healthy, they have Evander Kane. They need more guys who are capable of making things happen off of the cycle. You heard me talk about that a lot during the Stanley Cup final, that in the games the Oilers were struggling to score, it was because the Florida forecheck got going and going and going, and it started to wear Edmonton down, so that by the time the Oilers defensemen were actually able to recover the puck, break out, transition from defense to offense, those forwards were already gassed. And that's why it's really imperative that in your bottom six, you have forwards who are capable of getting the puck into the offensive zone and cycling, carrying the puck along, forcing the other team to play defense. And even if it doesn't lead to chance creation, make the other team play defense, force their defensemen to make decisions, wear them down, because that begins to accumulate. And it's not something that I'm going to ask McDavid or Draisaitl or Hyman or any of those high-end guys to do. But Ryan McLeod, Warren Fogle, those guys in particular were pretty good at that. They were really good at cycling, putting pressure on the other team, forcing them to play defense. And while Skinner definitely should, as long as he's healthy, he should be a 25 goal guy at minimum. And Arvidsson should be easily 45, 50 points. Those guys do not have the skill sets that McLeod does and that Warren Fogle do. So that's going to skew the Oilers towards a more skill-based approach. You know, the idea of, can you have too much skill? And I don't necessarily think that's really a thing. I do think you want to have diversity of style. You don't want too many guys who are good at the same thing on the same team, because then that makes you one-dimensional, and that makes it easier for the other team to stop you. And last year's Oilers were pretty good at having a diverse way of attacking offensively, as to not run into that issue until they ran into a Florida team that played elite team defense. Not just good defensemen, but their forwards actively involved in playing defense, preventing chances against, or limiting the quality of chances against. And then the last question of this first segment. It's real simple. We talked about him. He had an entire episode last week. Can Darnell Nurse salvage his reputation, salvage his role? Because we went from, he's going to figure it out, he gets paid a lot of money, the Oilers are going to give him a lot of chances, to low man on the totem pole, fewest minutes in a playoff game of any defenseman on the Oilers in the Canucks series and at points in the Dallas series. He gets paid a lot of money. He has very glaring deficiencies, especially when it comes to his foot speed. He is big, but he doesn't throw a lot of hits. He's big, but he's not that imposing. He's not that rugged of a player. Darnell Nurse has ability, but his decision-making and his skating eroding has hurt his decision-making. And because he doesn't trust his decision-making, he's more frantic. He's more haptic in his approach. And that's why he's so inconsistent. You don't know what you're going to get from him because he's not trusting his instincts. It is really difficult when you are a player with that much NHL experience who has that much game time to overcome that type of, for the lack of a better term, the yips. You know, we talk about the yips in baseball where a guy suddenly can't throw from third to first or short to first, but it's the same general principle here. Darnell Nurse has been an effective hockey player at various points of his NHL career. Right now, he is not effective. The Oilers are going to do everything in their power to make his workload easier, to give him better game situations, in the hope that it'll lead to better results. So even though he's not actively driving play, he's not actively improving the game state, he's not hurting the team anymore, because during the playoffs last year, there were real stretches where he was actively hurting the team. And it's not fair to only put it on him. Some of it was on Cody Ceci, because that was a fundamentally flawed pair. We talked about this on the Darnell Nurse episode last week. In a vacuum, Ceci is supposed to be able to skate and move the puck out of danger. Ceci can just skate. He's not that good of a passer of the puck. Nurse, he's supposed to go get the puck, but because he's so slow, he loses a lot of foot races. Because he's so slow, he has to be conservative defending his own blue line, so he's dropping and dropping and dropping until he's on his goalie's lap, and the other team is skating at him at full speed because he's been so conservative in conceding position. That will do it for this first segment of Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day. So be sure to stick around for the next segment, where we're going to tackle stuff that's going on around the Oilers. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Thank you to everybody hanging out on this Friday edition of Locked On Oilers. Hopefully, you got something fun planned this weekend, whether that's rotting, if you're going to get in an episode or two of The Boys, The Bear. Maybe you're going out. Maybe you got plans. Maybe you got a barbecue. Maybe you and your friends are going out. Whatever it is, hope you are as excited for the weekend as I am. Moving along on our list of Oilers-centric questions. Next up, just how good is Zach Hyman? We talked about this on Wednesday's edition of Locked On Oilers. The entire episode was all about Zach Hyman, why he was able to go from 30-goal scorer to 50-goal scorer in a single season. And I think, based on that episode, I am inclined to believe Zach Hyman can safely be a 30-goal scorer in today's NHL. Now, I think 30 goals is the low end of the spectrum. I think if Hyman gets the results he needs to match his process, I think there's a good chance that he probably takes a step back as far as the underlyings and the shooting percentage in particular. He shot 18.6. He's a career 12.5. Even if that comes down to 15, 13 even, he should still easily be in the ballpark for 30 goals because the volume of chances he's able to get because of the game situations he plays in, because he plays so much with McDavid, because he plays so much with Bouchard and with Ekholm, they really control the game state. And you saw Connor McDavid realize, oh, Zach's taken a step here. I can rely on him to put this puck in the net if I can find him. And one of the driving forces of Connor McDavid having 100 assists last year, you got to think about it. Bouchard, Hyman only had 15 goals on the power play last year. This wasn't like the Chris Kreider year a couple years ago where Kreider had 50-something goals and he had 29, 30 of them on the power play. Hyman did a lot of the dirty work on the at 5-on-5. It was 39 even strength goals. It was 15 power play goals. He had that type of jump is not crazy. You know, he had 15 power play goals 2 years ago. He had 15 power play goals this past year. There was no insane jump. There was no crazy alteration in trajectory. He shot the puck a little bit more. He had 15 more shots on goal than the year prior. And his shooting percentage jumped up 15%. Jumped up to 18%. 18% is the upper echelon. You know, that's what an Austin Matthews type player shoots. I don't think Zach Hyman is that good, but I do think based on volume, the quality of chances, who he plays with, I think he's easily a 30-goal guy as long as he stays healthy. And then you start talking about the upside of things. Maybe the power play is a little bit better this year, went from 4th 2 years ago to 10th this past year in the regular season. Maybe that power play creeps up a few more spots and Hyman goes from 15 to 20 power play goals to make up for some of the drop off at 5-on-5. And that's the fun of being able to game it out statistically and think, oh, well, if the shooting percentage goes down, how can he make up some of the deficit of the goals he didn't score? And you can start to get a better understanding of how teams project and forecast what players are going to do. The next question. This is about the Pacific Division at large. Well, the Oilers do have questions, you know, their goaltending. They're very uncertain on the back end what their 6 defenseman situation, their first 6 guys is going to look like. We know Bouchard, we know Ekholm, we know Darnell Nurse is not going anywhere, and we know for sure Philip Broberg will be here. After that, there are questions. One of Brett Kulak or Cody Ceci is almost assuredly gone. Unless the Oilers are able to convince Evander Kane to waive his no-trade clause 9 months ahead of time, you know, they can trade him ahead of next year's deadline. His full no-movement clause goes to a no-trade clause on March 5th of 2025. Unless they're able to convince Evander Kane of that, the only way the Oilers are going to be able to create enough cap space to be able to give Dylan Holloway and Philip Broberg contracts to play next year is if they trade Kulak or Ceci. Reportedly, there is a market for Ceci. I do imagine there would be one for Kulak as well, but that doesn't reflect what happened around them. Let's bounce around. Vancouver, they did lose some guys. They put some chips in on guys, Lindholm, Zadorov, and they opted to replace Zadorov with Vincent Desharnais. They opted to replace Lindholm's money with Jake DeBrusk, and They are banking on Thatcher Demko being very good again, which I do think that's feasible. I think Thatcher Demko, when he's healthy, is a top 10 goalie in the league. I don't know if he can be top 5 again without, other goalies around him maybe having a bit of a drop off, but you've got Demko, you've got Quinn Hughes, Elias Pettersson coming off a really rough playoffs, but a really good regular season. JT Miller was over 100 points again. Brock Besser, 40 goals, first time in his career. He reached that milestone. They've got a lot of talent on that team, but there is a real consideration of what's going on their back end. They do have question marks on their back end. And that was ultimately what was their undoing in the postseason this past year, was that their defense, as good as team defense as they played, similarly to Florida, Rick Tockett's a really good defensive coach. Their defense was ultimately part of what undid them. And going for size, where it's Soucy and it's Desharnais and Tyler Myers, when you really probably should have opted for more puck moving guys, that's a real question mark for them. You can talk about Vegas. You lose a Jonathan Marchessault. Everybody else is a year older. You're banking on guys like Alexander Holtz and Victor Olofsson to immediately jump into your top 9 and make a positive impact. The Golden Knights have more questions this year than basically any year since their inception as a team, because they've pushed so many chips in so many times. They just don't have the flexibility to maintain expensive people. Then you can talk about the Kings, who are more or less in the exact same boat. They took out Pierre-Luc Dubois. They brought in Warren Fogle. They traded Pierre-Luc Dubois for Darcy Kemper. So they're going to have a Darcy Kemper in a tandem to replace Cam Talbot. Doughty and Kopitar, another year older. Maybe Quentin Byfield can take a step forward. Maybe someone down that lineup, and maybe Trevor Moore. I don't know. I think the Kings are very much stuck where they are, where they're good, but they're not Stanley Cup good, and that's a really rough place to be. And then if you want to bounce around real quick, the Ducks, the Sharks, they're 2 years away from being a year away. I like the moves the Sharks made, obviously. Anytime you can bring in a player the caliber of Macklin Celebrini, you should be excited. Will Smith, they were able to get under contract as well. William Eklund has been floating around the periphery of a few years. Maybe he's ready to go. The Ducks have picked in the top 3 a couple years in a row. They need a healthy season from Trevor Zegras, from Mason McTavish. Their goaltending, their defense, big question marks. The Flames, very much a rebuilding team, going into the year with Dustin Wolf and Daniel Vladar as their goalies. They've turned over more than half of their defense. They're going into next season with their leading goal scorer from this past year being Blake Coleman, their leading point scorer being Nazem Kadri in the low 70s for point total. The Kraken, they spent a lot of money on Chandler Stevenson and Brandon Montour, but I'm not particularly convinced they're ready to make a big leap. Sure, with average goaltending, they're probably a playoff team, but they're not a Stanley Cup contender. And then, real quick, we'll squeeze this in before the break. The Oilers are going to need to trade for a defenseman. So I'm glad you asked. I went and looked. These are the unrestricted free agent defensemen they could trade for at the deadline this upcoming year. Brent Burns and Dmitry Orlov. If the Hurricanes are in a weird year, I could see it. Aaron Ekblad, he's injury prone and right-handed. I don't know. Jeff Petrie is all offense. Neil Pionk is all offense. Vladislav Gavrikov, I don't really like the fit. Esa Lindell, the Stars are going to be in the mix. I can't see them trading him. Shea Theodore, maybe if Vegas has the year from hell, I could see it. Jacob Chikrin, if Washington stinks, maybe. Old friend Adam Larson, if Seattle stinks, maybe. Jake McCabe, I don't see it. David Savard, I don't really see it. Brian Dumoulin, I could see he signed with a bad team. He would be able to be available at the deadline. Ian Cole, maybe if Utah's bad. Braden McNabb, if Vegas is bad, maybe. Jan Ruda, if Tampa Bay opts, they want the cap space. I don't know. None of those guys really jump out and scream fourth defenseman other than Chikrin, and I really doubt Washington's going to do that. So those are some early thoughts as far as who the Oilers' sixth defenseman could be come playoff time. We're going to take one more quick break. We're going to come back. We're going to tackle the big picture outlook for the team this upcoming season. So be sure to stick around to this edition of Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day. It is summer. That means hot dogs, barbecues, the beach, and of course, baseball and concerts. And the only place I buy tickets when I'm going to an event is through our friends over at Game Time. I have a busy week. This past Wednesday, I went to the Foo Fighters at Citi Field. Today, Friday, I will be at Fenway Park to see Noah Khan. Sunday, I will be back at Citi Field to see Blink-182. And I bought tickets for all three of those shows from our friends at Game Time, with some of the best features in the ticket buying business. Things like all-in pricing, where they show you the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. Zone deals, where you choose a section and let Game Time choose the seats. My personal favorite, the seat view, where you get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. The lowest price guarantee, where Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. And Game Time ticket coverage, your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON NHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thank you to everybody hanging out on this Friday edition in the dead of summer of this edition of Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day. Okay. Talking about the big picture, one question I do still have. I want to know Chris Knobloch's deal going forward. Obviously, things worked out very well. At various points last year, he pushed the exact right button at the exact right time. Having the conviction to scratch Cody Ceci, to scratch Desharnais, to juggle the lines, to say, this isn't working, let's try this. Or the most obvious one, saying, Skinner's not working, I need to shake things up, and going to Calvin Pickard for games 4 and 5 of the Vancouver series. Obviously, Pickard only won one of the two starts, but having the conviction to make a difficult decision because you know it's going to help the team, that type of instinct is hard to come by. There are not a lot of coaches in the NHL who are willing to make those types of changes. There are a lot of coaches who would say, well, we won 50-something regular season games with this group. I'm not changing things now in the playoffs. That's crazy. Whereas Knobloch looked at the situation objectively and said, I think we can make this much of an improvement if we try this. And because it's the playoffs, because we need to win this game, I got to try it. If that means running McDavid with Draisaitl with Hyman for 24 minutes, we got to do it. If that means healthy scratching Ceci or healthy scratching Desharnais, or that means cutting Nurse's minutes by 2 or 3 minutes in a game, if that means inserting Philip Broberg into the lineup, if that means going from Skinner to Pickard back to Skinner, if that means taking Evander Kane off of Draisaitl's wing, whatever it takes, I'm willing to at least consider it. Now that Knobloch is a little more established, is he going to stick to that conviction, or is he going to fall into the trope that all of these hockey guys, these lifelongers, they turn into parodies of themselves where I got this far because I know what I know. I'm not going to go against my instincts. And very quickly you fall into a self-fulfilling prophecy of, well, this is what I'm going to do because I know what I'm doing, as opposed to, well, can we do better? And that's your goal. That is what I want from my coach. I don't need to win every game. I don't need to win the Stanley Cup every year. I want to see the players getting better, and I want to see you putting those players in a position to succeed, to get more out of them, because that's your goal as a coach. You can't play the game for them, but you can put them in positions to succeed, to maximize what they're good at. That is my biggest pet peeve in all of sports when it comes to coaching. If you are asking guys to do things they're not good at, of course they're not going to get good results. So that's that. And then the last two questions. The worst case scenario for the Oilers is very simple. Stuart Skinner is bad. The Oilers are in the boat with what the Devils were last year, what the Kraken were, where you have a really good offense and you have enough quality defensemen that you're not awful. But if you have an 885 goalie, you're not going to win a lot of games in the NHL. Maybe in the regular season, as good as McDavid and Draisaitl are, the Oilers might be able to get away with it in a way the Devils were. And Devils were also significantly more injured, where it wasn't just a goalie issue. It was no Dougie Hamilton. It was no Jonas Siegenthaler. And then when Siegenthaler came back from injury, he was very ineffective. It was a lot of Brendan Smith. It was a lot of relying on veterans. And the Devils were not really in a position to capitalize on what they had up front. So that's the worst case scenario for the Oilers. Stuart Skinner entirely implodes, not an NHL caliber goalie this upcoming season. And you have to run basically a 50-50 split of him and Pickard, as opposed to the probably 55-27-ish that you're going to see this upcoming season. Based on what you would want in today's league, you don't really want your goalie hitting that 60 start mark. Maybe there's a trade for a backup goalie in season. Maybe there's a way, maybe there's a contingency I'm not thinking of in that plan. But being how capped out the Oilers are, I don't really see a world where they could trade for a goalie who's making any money. And the last thing you want to do on a playoff team is bring in an extremely volatile backup goalie, kind of similarly to what the Devils did going in with Akira Schmidt, who had, 5 games of NHL experience, and very quickly he turned back into a pumpkin. What the Sabres had happened to them, where they said, we're going to give it to Devin Levy to start the year. And he very quickly got overworked, overtired, suffered an injury, went back to the AHL, came back towards the end of the year. But that's your worst case. Your best case, they win the Stanley Cup. It's that simple. The Oilers are entirely capable. They are the betting favorite to win the Stanley Cup. They have pretty much the insane team returning. They do need another defenseman. They probably could use a little more confidence in net, but the Oilers are going to be right there. They are probably the second best team on paper in the West. They have an argument to be the first best team in the entire West, but you got to see how things shake out. No one's team on July 19th is the same team as it's going to be the day the playoffs start. There will be trades, there will be injuries, there will be call-ups. Maybe there's a player I'm not thinking of that's going to be a contributor on this Oilers team, or another team is going to have a call-up that's going to make a massive impact for them. So that'll do it for this edition of Locked On Oilers 10 Questions. Hopefully, have a nice, safe, fun weekend. If you could be so kind before you get out of here, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please leave the show a 5-star review. It helps the show so very much. If you are watching over on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, hit the alarm bell, get a notification whenever a new episode goes live. Leave me a comment. What's your biggest question about the Oilers going into next season? I will read the best ones on Monday's show. I will talk to you guys then. Have a safe and fun weekend. Until then, let's go Oilers.